Causality is the principle of cause and effect, and it governs fate. Just as it is impossible for a fish to survive out of water, it is impossible to resist the tides of causality. Whatever is preordained will come to pass. There is no point in struggling against it. Or, so the God Hand would have you believe. The God Hand, 5 primordial devilish entities that are said to govern causality, perpetuate the idea of evil and make all living things suffer the worst possible fates. But while a fish may not survive outside of water for long, it can indeed jump out of the pond. Despite the weight of fate's cruelties, there are those who have struggled and successfully survived longer than the God Hand would have ever suspected. In this world where only exceptional willpower can better one's fate, there are no guarantees, but there is no hope without struggle. This is Berserk by the late Kentaro Miura. You may apply all trigger warnings to the story, even the worst you can imagine: grotesque violence, medieval torture, and horrifying rape. In spite of the atrocities depicted in this story, it tells a poignant tale about why it is important to resist oppressive forces, and it demonstrates how comfort can be found even in the worst of nightmare worlds. Welcome to Dystopian Review, the place where we dream of nightmare worlds.
Dies ire, dies illa, solvet seclum in favilla. Te se David cum Sibilla.
Berserk is a manga, or Japanese comic, created by the dearly departed Kentaro Miura and carried on in his honor by his art studio, Studio Gaga. It depicts the tale of a man known as the Black Swordsman, whose name is, fittingly given the thematic emphasis on struggling through the unthinkably monstrous, Guts. Guts' life history is the tale of atrocities. Miraculously born in the aftermath of his mother being hung from a tree, every day of his life has been a struggle. Infant Guts was rescued by a camp follower of a mercenary group, but she died soon after adopting him. Her lover, the mercenary captain Gambino, raised the young Guts to be a fighter, but also sold him for a night to one of his comrades. Guts avenged himself against Gambino and became a wandering mercenary, selling his services to the highest bidder. It wasn't until long after he'd slain Gambino and set off on his own that Guts found his first chosen family, the Band of the Hawk. He developed friendships with his new comrades, but his relationships with 2 of them stood out. He had a playful rivalry with the group's lady captain, Casca, and he became the most trusted soldier of the Hawk's commander, Griffith. Leading the band's raider group, Guts put his incredible swordsmanship to use for the Kingdom of Midland. You see, when he was a child in Gambino's team, he was trained with adult-sized swords as they didn't have any for children. This resulted in him growing to use a tremendous greatsword to strike his foes down, and strike them down he did. The Band of the Hawk was instrumental in bringing Midland's 100 years of war against its neighbor Tudor to a close with the recapture of the fortress Doldry. Now knighted and part of the nobility during a time of peace, the Band of the Hawk had less direction. Guts felt he needed to work on himself. Despite the group's pleas, including those of his now lover Casca, he left. This infuriated Griffith, who responded by deciding it was a good idea to seduce the Princess of Midland, Charlotte. His fornication was discovered, and he was imprisoned, tortured, and maimed. Guts later rejoined the band, now a group of renegades led by Casca, and helped them rescue Griffith from his captivity. They fled Midland, fending off danger after ever greater danger as they ran. Though rescued, Griffith was a broken shell of himself. His internal thoughts are rarely presented to the reader, but it seemed that he was jealous of Guts and Casca's relationship and fearful of being completely dependent upon them for the rest of his life. In the midst of yet another terrible battle, Griffith somehow managed to regain possession of his most sacred prize, a heretical object called the Crimson Behelit. There are many Behelits, tiny eggs with misshapen faces carved upon them, but only one was crimson. Whether deliberately or accidentally, in his despair, Griffith activated it. The fundamental laws of the universe melted away and the sun was blotted out by the moon. At this event, simply known as the eclipse, Griffith was greeted by the manifestation of 4 demonic demigods known collectively as the God Hand. They revealed that it was his life's purpose to join them as a 5th God Hand member. All it would take to be reborn as one of them would be to offer up a great sacrifice. Griffith, recognizing that his entire life amounted to a staircase of human corpses leading to a castle representing the kingdom he wished to build, accepts. Every member of the band that was present is suddenly scarred by the brand of sacrifice. For Guts, the brand appears in the back of his neck. The brand serves as a sort of bait for demonic forces, from the mundane to the greatest of all threats, apostles, creatures who were once human themselves, but made their own sacrifices to obtain hellacious power. The apostles present began slaughtering the band that had, until recently, been protecting Griffith. Only 2 members of the band survived the eclipse. Guts, due to his overwhelming strength and his blatant refusal to die, and Casca, who was rescued only after being savagely violated by Griffith. Casca was left as a shadow of her old self, her mind broken and childlike. Guts, on the other hand, was left without an arm and an eye, and without many options for survival. They retreated to a former member of the band, Rickert, who was able to provide Casca with shelter in an enchanted mine that warded off evil spirits. Rickert's mentor at blacksmithing, Godo, provided Guts with an expertly crafted armor and a weapon unlike any other wielded by humans, the Dragon Slayer. It was too big to be called a sword. It was more like a slab of iron with a sharpened edge. It was also the perfect weapon to take on an apostle and win. And that's what Guts spent the next 2 years doing, struggling to take down the apostles and, so he hoped, getting revenge against Griffith. He soaked his blade in so much demon blood that it became a magical artifact in its own right. But if the rest of the story was simply about revenge, it wouldn't be so captivating. Of the themes present throughout the story, the one we've highlighted thus far is that of the struggler. It's the idea that, in order to survive, let alone prosper, people must fight for every step they take. The struggle is most directly portrayed through Guts' tenacity in fighting apostles, wherein he takes terrible risks to seek out victory. Especially in the early part of the series, Guts is always one step away from death, fighting impossibly powerful monsters. It is his will to live that carries him forward throughout the story. This motif of "you must struggle or you will die" is perhaps best embodied by the magical suit of armor Guts is later given, the Berserker armor. This armor allows its wearer to push their bodies beyond their normal limits, performing feats they would otherwise be incapable of. Furthermore, should their bones break, the armor will inject itself into the gap and hold the wound together. This is not healing magic. They are, in fact, hurt worse than they would otherwise have been. They are just able to continue fighting until the threat is destroyed, at which point they are on their own. But we have to bear in mind that Guts has been struggling to survive ever since he was born. He survived his birth, which was no easy feat in any medieval setting, let alone being born from a deceased mother. He survived his time in Gambino's cruel care. He survived his time as a mercenary as well as his time as a member of the Band of the Hawk. All of these tribulations took place before the eclipse, and he survived that too. The motive of the story is plain. If you fight to see another day, there's a good chance you might. Another theme to bear in mind is that of how power corrupts someone absolutely, and that it has impacts on those around them. The higher Griffith rose in the ranks, the more casual his violence became. When he ascended into the god hand as Femto, Griffith's corruption killed damn near all of his friends and followers. His precious Falconia is held together by apostles doing his bidding. When he encounters the slightest resistance, such as Rickert rejecting him, he tacitly permits an attempt on his former friend's life. Guts' growth in power starts off by corrupting him, too. He develops this sort of inner monster, and he is cruel even to those he tries to help. Particularly during his time as the Black Swordsman, Guts barely clings to his humanity. After the eclipse, who can blame him for believing in a world where cruelty is the only force that controls people? The strong live, the weak die. A simplistic philosophy, but one Guts has seen take deep root in his life. But that's not all there is to this story. The last theme we're going to highlight today is that of the way loss and trauma changes people and how those changes lead to finding new hope. Guts loses nearly everything and everyone he loves. Only Casca and Rickert survive the eclipse, and Casca is forever changed. He goes on to make new friends, building an entourage of people who symbiotically improve him as he improves them. Slowly but surely, Guts builds a new group. Each of his friends in this ensemble helps rebuild a different part of himself, even as he gives them new hopes of their own. Most notably, he builds bonds with the fairy Puck, resisting the cheerful creature's advances at first, but depending on Puck for the healing power of his fairy dust. His friends later hatch a plot to restore Casca's mind, a plan which requires a tremendous quest, and whose consequences we are still watching play out on the page. On May 6, 2021, Berserk's author Kentaro Miura passed away. After his death, a number of his colleagues at his studio, Studio Gaga, agreed to continue with the story under the direction of Miura's close friend Koji Mori. I cannot say with any certainty what notes Miura may have left behind. We simply don't know. But this much can be said. Even though Miura would take hiatuses from his work, he always came back to it. He always struggled onward to tell his story with the same peerless artwork as ever. In doing so, he put together a group that can carry on with his life's work, even when he cannot be with them. That is something to be respected. We've spent a lot of time talking about the literary elements that make up Berserk's story, but it would be a genuine oversight if we didn't take a moment to simply appreciate the breathtaking beauty that Miura was capable of making. Here we have the city of Falconia, wherein you can see virtually every stone and roof tile. It's just one of literally thousands of breathtaking pieces of art that Miura and his team made. There's two last things to point out. The first is that there are Berserk anime available to be watched. There's a well-regarded, if nostalgic, 1997 anime that just covers the Golden Age arc, a trio of animated movies that retread the Golden Age arc, and there's 2 seasons of a less well-regarded anime from 2016 to 2017 that picked up the story after the Lost Children arc that's supposed to follow the Golden Age. There's nothing wrong with watching the anime, they're totally engaging, but the manga really is the only way to get the whole story, and to be honest, it's the best way to get all of the art. The last thing to draw your attention to is the composer and primary musician for the anime and movies, namely Susumu Hirasawa. The music you've heard today are the songs Ash Crow, Forces, and the aria. He is, for my money, the strongest point of all of the anime. His vocals are fantastic and his instrumentation nails down Berserk's darker themes. If you're reading the comic, listen to some of his music as you do. Thank you so much for joining me in this review of Berserk, and for diving into this nightmare world. Folks, thank you so much for taking your time out to watch and or listen to this review. I'm amazed at the feedback I got from my previous review of Warhammer 40,000, and I hope this video does just as well. I'm not sure what I'll do next, maybe The Handmaid's Tale, maybe Hunter x Hunter, but I'm open to suggestions. They've just got to be things I can find sources to research and take images from. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. If you want updates on this series, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel and I'll post when I know what's coming up next. Thank you all so much one last time. Here's a quick outtake. He retreated to a former member of the band, Rickett. God damn it, Rickety Cricket. No!